the idea that today's problems were yesterday's solutions, I think it really does ring true. And the people who started extracting oil originally were trying to save the whales, because the gas lamps and such that you referred to were fueled by whale blubber. And so you had these environmentalists saying, can we find an alternative fuel source?
That's crazy.
Right? Going, okay, like maybe this black oozy stuff in Texas or wherever it was might be able to be an alternative to the whale blubber so that we can leave the whales alone.
Whale-free energy.
Whale-free energy. So, yeah, it's so interesting. And
One, two, three, four.
You're listening to Granite Goodness, the podcast where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place.
Oh, Susie, where are you going now?
My name is Andy DeMeo. This episode was sponsored by and recorded in Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Today I'm speaking to my friend Anna Yates. Anna leads environmental health, safety, and sustainability efforts at Albany International, a leading global manufacturer of advanced textiles and materials. Our conversation covers sustainability reporting, Australian engineers, giant toilets, international supply chains, public health, and a ton of other things I hope you enjoy on this episode of Granite Goodness. Anna, welcome to Granite Goodness.
thanks, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on. You are one of my favorite people.
Aw.
And thank you for coming on today.
Absolutely. When you asked, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah. So I met you when I entered the sustainable finance industry.
Yes.
And I've always had a really high impression of you. You seem like someone who is very good at solving complex problems in many different ways, and you're just a real wonderkind dynamo of a person. And I knew when I began this project that I had to get you on here.
Aw, that means a lot.
We begin every episode with 10 straight minutes of buttering up the guests.
Okay.
We have about 8 more minutes of this to go.
Okay.
But yeah, okay. So your wheelhouse is, you didn't even have one. I feel like you have so much expertise and experience across many different things. But can you talk to me a little bit about what you're doing now? You're at Albany International.
Yes. So I did recently take on environmental health and safety responsibility at the corporate level. So that's really more around our reporting and compliance. But since I started a little over a year ago, I've been leading our sustainability efforts, which is a new role for the company. Like many companies, establishing this position is relatively recent. And so I'm the first one to be in the role, which has been fantastic because I have been able to create something not from scratch, because there were a lot of building blocks in place already with a lot of people doing a lot of interesting work around sustainability. It just wasn't necessarily called that or under that umbrella.
Sure.
And so a lot of what I've been doing is pulling that all together and creating a real global strategy around sustainability and figuring out how sustainability works for our business, because I think it's really fun being in a corporate doing sustainability, because you just have to look at things a little bit differently. Because I was at a conference recently and a chief sustainability officer said something like, if it's not aligned with our business, then that's philanthropy.
Sure.
And so, what we really want to do as a corporate is make sustainability create value for our business, for our customers, for our employees, for our stakeholders. And I think the best part of being in this space today is that that's actually really easy, because it's sustainability makes good sense for so many reasons.
You literally just answered my first question for you.
Oh, wonderful.
This is going so well already. I mean, I was going to add, right off the bat, that this is the thing that I feel like you're really great at talking about. What makes sustainability a value add for an organization, right? Or put in other words, if somebody says to you, hey, the environment is great, social initiatives are great, but I'm here to make money, right? What do you say to that person?
Yeah, I'd say we're speaking the same language, because if you look at, so I generally think about it as, what you do and how you do it. So for us, we're a material science and manufacturing company. So one of the things we make is custom parts for aviation and aircraft made out of carbon fiber. Those are lighter than traditional titanium or other metal components. And so the fuel efficiency can be significant that you gain from using a carbon fiber, say, fan blade for the engine or a fan case for the engine. So that's already a sustainability story, because, I spend a lot of time thinking and reading and listening to people talk about how we decarbonize aviation, because that's a big one. There's
Right.
no silver bullet for that. It is not going to be anytime soon, if ever, that we're all flying around in hydrogen or electric planes on long haul flights. It's just not feasible. So, making every component of an aircraft lighter and more fuel efficient is actually a really, really important part of the equation to decarbonizing aviation. So that's what we do. That's, just one example. And so there are a whole number of additional applications that we could explore, that companies like us could explore for carbon fiber, making everything lighter and therefore more fuel efficient. So if we're talking about adding value for the business and making money, getting that bottom line where we want it, that's huge, because that's a core part of our business. The industry needs it. Our customers need it. There's a huge amount of actual business opportunity, really tangible business growth opportunity. And then if we look at an example on how we do it, today, energy's expensive,
Right.
and it's probably not going to get cheaper, at least, talking about traditional fossil fuel energy. And we've had a lot of geopolitical events that have been reminding us all of that. And I was reading Larry Fink's annual letter to shareholders, and he talks about energy pragmatism and the idea of, energy resilience being tied to energy resilience and independence being tied to decarbonization. And so, again, it's just such a great time to be in this space, because it now makes business sense to decouple your business from the price of oil.
Right.
Because that's not, I think anybody can see that is probably going to be an increasing cost over time. And that's certainly been the trend to date. So if we want to be generating more of our energy needs from on-site renewables, where we own that, we are not paying anybody for it, we're just basically paying ourselves back for the CapEx expense to get that established, then that ends up being good for business. You'd have to probably widen the lens a little bit than looking quarter to quarter, but it's still ultimately a really good business story when you look at both the actual cost of your energy and also your resilience in terms of grid disruption and everything, to have that as a backup, and then also your energy independence, which I think has become an increasing focus for a lot of us around the world.
Yeah. God, that was a fantastic answer. One of the things that you said that I really liked is you talk about how it makes business sense today, right? And something that I've come to learn, right, not just from this podcast, but in my work, our work, and the more I've kind of been in this world, if you kind of think about all this stuff in theory, right, because there's a strong business argument for a lot of these principles and ways of doing business today, in theory, it means that it could have always been true, right? Like, because we know that it's rationally a good decision to, enhance resource efficiency and reduce material inputs to get more output, right? Like in all these ways from innovation and technology and science, right? That is something that I find really exciting, right? Because we now are learning in all these ways that, the creation of wealth and value add, like so many of these things are not zero sum fundamentally.
Exactly.
Right. And because we know that today, it kind of implies that it never actually had to be that way. Right. So it kind of begs the question, what's standing in the way of more of those things being true? How do we get to that future faster? Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's so true for so many things. I think one thing that has changed is things like the cost of renewables coming down.
Yeah.
Because even probably just 10 years ago, I think it would have been a very different equation to be looking at installing, solar at one of our facilities, for example, because we have really high energy needs. We're making things. So that definitely has shifted the equation a bit, but I think you're totally right. I mean, it's always made sense and I think being in manufacturing is really interesting because reducing your waste, your raw material waste by improving your manufacturing process has always been a focus for the manufacturing industry because that always made financial sense. You want to spend less on your raw materials and waste less because then you've bought that material that you're not using, and then you usually have to pay to dispose of it as well. So you always want to avoid that, and that's one of the things that's been really interesting and fun coming into a manufacturing company because that ethos has always been there. To your point,
Right.
That's just always been the desired way to do things and to innovate and to find better procedures. So we focus a lot on continuous improvement, and we have a lot of Lean Six Sigma and black belts and all these very clever people figuring out more clever ways to do things. And that has been just such a tailwind for sustainability efforts because to take that knowledge and understanding of how to innovate and improve processes and then just kind of put this sustainability lens on top of the traditional manufacturing lens, and what people are able to come up with is just incredible.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the old scientific adage, standing on the shoulders of
Yes.
giants, so to speak, right? But it's kind of what a lot of things are, right? It's all just we iterate, we learn things, we come in, we solve problems, and I'm trying to expand the scope of this podcast to not just sustainability, but I find it challenging because it's all sustainability fundamentally.
Yes.
Which is something I find myself saying a lot, but that's kind of beautiful.
It is beautiful. Yeah.
Anyway, so another emerging theme of this podcast is that so much of the really important work, at least in my view, that makes the world a better place, on the face of it, or maybe at least in the beginning, it's not as sexy or exciting, right? Of course, I mean, you and I both know sustainability reporting is actually quite tantalizing.
It is sexy.
Yeah, it's extremely sexy. But can you talk a little bit about that, or has your view changed on this since you started your career? Like something that moves the needle fundamentally versus something that, feels like it does, but maybe doesn't actually. Like, do you have an ideology about, progress or things of that nature?
Well, I think to sort of come back to this idea of reporting and communication, and I do feel like that is really core to this. And it kind of ties back to your first question as well, or maybe it was your second question about that value add. And when you have someone who's just not thinking in the same way,
right,
to be able to bridge that gap about, hey, we actually want the same thing, and we can get there if we work together and just sort of each shift our thinking a little bit. And so I do think that the element of reporting and communication is just absolutely critical, because I've been in sustainability my whole career, and it's just the way my brain works and the way I'm wired. And I have to constantly remind myself that a lot of people are not eating, sleeping, breathing sustainability. They have other core functions. They come from a different background with a very different focus. And it's not that they don't care or aren't interested. It's just that that's not their day to day. And I think that for anybody in a sustainability function that is part of a broader business, that's just sort of a really important ongoing self-education and self-awareness thing, that, okay, so I see it this way and it seems so obvious that this is what we need to do. But people who have totally different priorities as part of their roles are, I need to figure out how to bring everybody along on the journey, which I don't really love that expression, but anyway, it fits the purpose. So yeah, I think that the communication is just incredibly important to make sure that you're educating everybody on what this looks like today. So again, coming back to the price of solar energy, if someone's thinking about it in their head as this prohibitively expensive CapEx, then education that, hey, it's actually pretty affordable once you factor in, we get a tax credit here, or maybe we get a government rebate, or there's some sort of subsidy, plus it brings our monthly bill down by X amount. So there's this education piece, and then the broad communication, I think, is just so important. And this isn't exactly related to the question you asked, but I think one of the things that a lot of companies are now really trying to navigate is we're being faced with an unprecedented level of regulatory requirements around sustainability. And I very much welcome that. I think it's super important to have that transparency and accountability. And at the same time, I think it makes it critical that we stick to our core sustainability philosophy and strategy, because it's very easy to start getting pulled in a whole bunch of different directions.
Right.
And the new regulations are focused around materiality, and I think that that's just such an important concept to maintain as your North Star, because it's not possible, and it's not a good use of resources, to be chasing every metric.
Yeah.
But really focusing on the ones that are material to your business, that are going to actually move the needle from a sustainability perspective and be able to add value to your business, and to make sure that you're walking that line between constantly taking action and moving forward with your initiatives and your implementation schedule, while you're focused so heavily on the reporting and these new levels of, we have to have our sustainability data assured now by a third-party auditor, which is huge. We've never done that before. This is all new. So there's this very large, very new compliance burden, and I just personally feel that it's so important that we don't let that take away from the ultimate goal, which is, fighting climate change, going renewable, reducing our waste streams, and finding new, better inputs for our materials that are going to be more sustainable. Creating better outcomes, better products for our customers, making sure that we're continuing to push the envelope to make our company a better place for our employees, and really having that full stakeholder approach. And the reporting has become so significant that I think it's easy to get, tunnel vision into that, whereas we've got this whole broad portfolio of priorities that we need to focus on. So I think just, coming back to that core, what's material to your company, what's authentically real and important to your company, and sticking to that ethos and that groundedness, and what your purpose and your mission is as an organization.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good. You keep segueing into.
Perfect.
It's like you're walking right into these.
I haven't seen these questions.
No,
before,
this is. Well, I was going to ask. the sustainability reporting stuff, right? The ranking of companies by social or environmental metrics. To a lot of people, I think some of that stuff, and this is kind of to your point, it can feel abstract, right? Certainly, there's an argument to be made that it's just a lot of paperwork to some people. For someone listening to this who isn't really in this world, can you help make it feel more real to them, right? Like what does a report, your idolized report, I guess, right? What does it mean for somebody in the supply chain, that a labor standards report or a material sourcing report or something of that nature, or an assessment was done, right? What does it actually mean for a real living person, not a pencil pusher, in the government?
Yes. Well, I think I was listening to a podcast just the other day it was Harvard Business School and one of the co-founders of Allbirds. And I loved the way he spoke about it, and really how Allbirds felt like they were seizing the opportunity for leadership in the industry, because there was kind of this white space in the footwear industry of companies taking the lead and doing something differently, and really pushing that envelope around materials. They consider themselves to be a material science company because they've totally reimagined what a shoe could be made of. And that's still a really awesome product. And so I think that the reporting, to a real human, one purpose it can serve is tangible demonstration of leadership. So to see, okay, like this company has actually switched over to renewables, and they've experimented with these different raw materials. For example, there's a company called Huntsman that's a chemical corporation that has a technology that can make carbon fiber out of methane. So just imagine the possibility of that. If you are capturing methane that's otherwise being released to the atmosphere. For your listeners who don't know, that's a potent greenhouse gas that contributes heavily to climate change. Imagine if you were capturing that, turn it into carbon fiber that's then making more efficient aircraft and cars and all manner of other things. Like, that's really, really cool. So I think so the reporting can serve as that real examples of what a company is doing to demonstrate that leadership. And that can bring people along. If other companies are seeing what's been done, what's possible, and hey, actually, we thought that was just a pie in the sky idea, but this company's doing it in real time. And look at their financials, and they're still making money. So
not a charity or something.
Right. So it's possible. So I think it shows what's possible. And then I think it also offers that accountability, which is just super important, because I think, a couple of years ago, a lot of companies got very excited and probably very well intentioned, but setting goals and making claims, and then we kind of all realized that, maybe that was a little bit premature. We didn't have all the data, or with the available technology and what you're willing to invest, that's not, feasible today to get there. So we're now seeing, people are calling it green hushing, companies just getting quieter on what they're doing. And so I think that the reporting, I would highlight the second real core purpose of it is that accountability. So, okay, hey, if we set a goal, or even just, stated that this is our mission, it doesn't have to be a KPI table with, all of the data necessarily, but okay, if we set this goal, this mission in principle, here's what we're doing to fulfill that. And, if you have the ability to have KPIs and have data that can track your progress against that, then even better, and provide your stakeholders with that level of accountability and transparency.
You talk about real people a lot, which sounds like a kind of a silly thing to say, but when you're working on these issues, right, whether it's gathering data for a report or writing the actual thing, like recentering your focus continually around, does this actually serve the ends of a real living person, right?
Yes.
Is a very good North Star, so to speak. And I kind of wonder, this is a segue into another question, right? You are the third person I've met who has received training as both an engineer and an Australian. What's going on there?
That's funny.
Is there some? No, seriously, I don't know what it is, but like I've met a lot of really impressive Australian engineers.
Interesting.
So I don't know what the deal is with that.
Okay.
But no, I mean engineering, right? I guess my actual question for you is, you are someone who, like, this is what I love about your career trajectory, right? Your engineering training, you have a master's in public health. It's clear that you have spent some time in the field, right? You understand, both what it's like to be kind of on the data collection, the reporting side of these incredibly complex problems. What materially is going into all that stuff, which I feel like, field experience and expertise and, sampling and all that is a core part of engineering training and experience. Is that something that you feel like comes in handy a lot? Your training as an engineer, or remembering, hey, there's people are out there on the other side or different parts of the supply chain, and that this is I'm accountable to these people, right?
100%. Yeah. 100%. So I think that engineering is just such a helpful core foundation, I think, in terms of how you think about and approach problems. I get to work with engineers a lot now, and it's great because your training is literally problem solving,
right.
Broadly speaking. And then the public health background, I think, really gave me that human side of it as well, because what I was particularly interested in my studies was that intersection of health and environment, and so very much the human aspect. So if you don't have appropriate waste management, I'm thinking about human waste here, which is definitely not sexy, but it can be very problematic. So if you don't have basic infrastructure and system, it does not have to be fancy.
Right.
People survived for thousands of years without, PVC piping and did okay.
Heated toilet seats.
And heated toilet seats, and the little plastic thing that goes around your toilet seat so you don't get germs. We did okay as a species without that kind of thing. But you need some norms and systems set up so that people aren't getting sick from this kind of thing. And similarly, if you don't have clean water, I mean, that's enormously problematic, obviously, and still, today, that's still an enormous problem around the world. So that really gave me access to the human side of all of this. And then my experience, so I'm not Australian for your listeners, but I did live there for a while, as well as in New Zealand, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
But I spent the first part of my career as a consultant working out of Australia and New Zealand. And I think one of the things, and I could talk about this all day, so you might have to stop me, but we did a lot of work consulting for mining projects, so environmental and social impact assessment. And I think that was such a valuable experience for me because, for one, it gave me a lot of insight into the complexity of some of this stuff. So as we know, to transition to a more sustainable economy, all of our renewables that are wonderful for so many reasons require a lot of things to come out of the ground. They require rare earth elements and other metals and materials that really only exist in the ground and often in parts of the world that are challenging to access. And, developing a large-scale mine and in jungles and deserts and all manner of places can be, there are lots of challenges there, both from an environmental and a social perspective. And so being really a part of that and, almost on the ground there through a lot of this was hugely insightful because it's complex. The kind of economics and the whole, societal and moral dilemma around, renewable energy is something we really, really need, but that's also not great because we need to get these metals somehow. And,
right.
We can recycle till the cows come home, but at least for a long time, we're still going to need virgin materials to come out of the ground. And so that's very challenging. That's a really real challenge, and it's a really real trade-off. It's not an easy one. But I think also just really experiencing what happens on the ground to the humans, the people in these communities, where the mines are being constructed. And it's so complex, and it often doesn't, again, when you sit here at a desk with a Western perspective, and you think, this is how this should work, and this is what's negative for the people, and this is what's positive. And actually, that's often not what happens. So for an example I love is that, so we did a lot of work in Papua New Guinea, and often the mines were being built in untouched jungle. I mean, there are communities in there, but there's no other infrastructure. Yeah. And so these communities that had been living in the jungle had no, there was no access road, there was no access to the broader economy of Papua New Guinea. And we would do all these studies about, okay, so if we put the road here, then this community, we would locate all the communities, and if we put it here and kind of have it wind this way up to the mine, then the communities won't be able to see the road, and we'll be minimizing the impact of dust reaching the villages. Yeah. And, so we're looking at sound and visual and dust and air quality impacts from this project. And they go, okay, we'll put the road here. That's good.
Right.
And then the communities would move their whole village to be next to the road because they want to be next to the road.
Right.
Because that's an opportunity for commerce. So you can sell. Yeah. Your produce or crafts that you've made to people passing by the road, so that it didn't matter if there was dust or noise or visual impact. That was their preference. Yeah. And that's just a tiny example of kind of it's not always what you think it's going to be, and what you might perceive as a really negative impact is not perceived as a negative impact by the communities. And it gets so complex, and all the social changes that can happen when you put a gigantic mine with thousands of workers in the middle of a jungle where nobody lived previously, and you give people jobs, and that might be really something people want. But if you don't also give them access to finance, then the money often gets used for very, let's say, not great purposes. Right. And then you get a lot of drinking alcohol, using drugs, prostitution, then you get, sexually transmitted infections, and there's all these flow-on effects that it's hard to think through all of the different permutations of the outcomes and the potential impacts when you're dealing with people. It's one thing to model a water quality assessment, and okay, if this is the load, and then it goes down the stream, and then the water quality is X, and that often tends to happen the way you model it. But with humans, like you said, we're not pencil pushers in a government box. Like these are people, and it's the complexity of that I just found fascinating, because it's people. It's
something to lean into, right? The complexity. It's not something to kind of run away from or say, you know what, we just shouldn't touch this entire thing, right? Because it's clear there is something there that everybody wants, right? And so often, I mean, I'll tell you a very similar story, right? We had another guest on here, my good friend Ian Grant, who has done a lot of work on wildlife conservation in Africa, particularly in Kenya. And he told me a story about how a young American volunteer that he worked with thought that he was helping some of these people by installing a kind of rudimentary chimney in their living spaces, basically huts. And he just thought it was the greatest thing. He's like, oh, well, it's all smoky in there. The kids' eyes are red, and it's causing problems. But I put the chimneys in, and actually ended up just spreading more malaria because it disrupted the system that those people had designed over a long time to prevent mosquitoes in their homes. And it's the same story you just told of right, like it's a kind of micro lesson, and this broader idea of solutions are gonna look different depending on where they are. And people talk a lot about how knowledge is local, right? You go to any town in New Hampshire, and they would tell you they'd be very opinionated about any town anywhere in the world, right? Like that's what's lovable about people. But solutions to problems are obviously local too,
right?
And I was going to ask if that's something you've encountered, but I feel like you just gave the most perfect example of that.
Yeah, I think that is definitely one of my favorite examples. But I absolutely think solutions are local, and I think that they should be, because I think, again, whether it's these Western ideas, trying to implement them in a non-Western geography and context, or just someone with a different opinion. Like people have their opinions and their views and the way they like doing things. I mean, we all do. And so I think the idea of someone from the outside, wherever the outside and your inside are, someone who's not part of that community and that identity coming in with a solution,
right?
And I put that in air quotes, that just can be problematic. I mean, I think that when solutions are actually homegrown and developed and iterated by the people who are actually going to benefit from them, it's just going to be much more likely to be successful, because they'll be fit for purpose, but they'll also be aligned with the ideals and the vision of that community or that area. And that just feels like such a better outcome to me than trying to impose these so-called solutions when they're not necessarily welcome.
Right. Or this, I mean, it is a little patronizing, right? This idea that, because these people don't have Walmart, that their societies and ways of life are not complex,
right,
or sophisticated or impressive or smart, right? That's a load of crap.
It is a load of crap.
And a lot of problems come from that. Not that there aren't incredible things that, different societies around the world can share with each other. Like, obviously that's true and is a wonderful thing. But you and I both are alums of the organization Engineers Without Borders.
Yes.
Right? Smack dab in the center of all of this stuff. Engineering solutions for the global poor, literally in an engineering context, right? Of like, hey, let's try and build a well and all that. Did you do that in grad school? Was that happening concurrently to your experience with public health? Did it help expose you to this world of supply chains and localized problem solving and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I joined Engineers Without Borders when I moved to Australia, actually, which was really fun. So there was a local chapter there, and I ended up taking over the WASH Knowledge Hub. So for your listeners who aren't familiar, that's water and sanitation and hygiene. And that was really fun. So we were really trying to it was a hub. So we were trying to bring people together who had knowledge on the topic, who are interested in the topic, to just build the knowledge base and the resources and capacity in the chapter on the topic of WASH, because we had engineers going out into the field all around the world to execute these projects. And I think one of the great things about Engineers Without Borders is that focus on local solutions and really working with the communities. So very much support that. So so what I was really trying to do was build the community and the interest in Melbourne, Victoria, where I was at the time. And one of the things I did learn, which is really not sustainability related, but I did learn that I am not an events manager, because I planned an event for World Toilet Day, and it actually went pretty well. And we got a gigantic toilet, and we had a video, and it was
big was the toilet?
It was quite big.
That doesn't answer the question.
I know. I'm trying to think. It didn't need...
You don't have to use imperial units if you don't want our listeners to understand.
I'm trying to remember exactly how we transported it.
Put it in metric terms and they won't know.
I'm pretty sure it could fit in the back seat of a car, or like in the back of a station wagon.
Okay,
this was a long time ago.
A truck is a car, and so is,
Yeah, it did not need its own trailer.
Okay.
It was not that big, and it could get into this. It was in a bar.
This is going to be the rest of the episode.
But my takeaway was that I should not do events. I should stick to the sustainability function.
Maybe
because
this event was just really hard to pull off. Sounds unusual.
I think event planners deserve a ton of credit. I think planning an event is harder than one would think. So huge shout out to all the event planners out there, because I realized that was
an event planner.
My sister's an event planner.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she does great work. And I have a couple of friends who are in events as well. So huge shout out to them. It's a skill set. It's not my skill set. I will stick to sustainability and talking about water and sanitation
Yeah.
rather than trying to plan the event. But it did work well. It was just a ton of work. But yeah, that was a great group of really, really motivated, really smart people. The Engineers Without Borders Australia does some really cool work and sends people to some really interesting places to do very cool and impactful projects.
Yeah. Well, I love running into people who have touched that organization in some way. Anna, would you consider yourself an optimist?
Yes, I would.
Why?
Well, I did reflect on this because I knew, that was a central theme of your podcast. So
Okay.
I did think about this a little bit as I was driving around in an electric vehicle this week. So I would say, I think that some of the challenges that we are facing right now, like climate change, are absolutely terrifying. I grew up around here, then lived overseas for a while, and then came back. And the creek, Chauncey Creek, where I grew up, there's an island in the creek that never used to be covered when I was a kid.
Right.
And I just remember visually where the high tide line was. And when I came back to the area, it's quite incredible how the high tide line is now much higher. It's frequently covered. And it's just a very tangible signal
Right.
that things are changing in real time. It's not a future thing or an abstract thing. And so, yeah, it's terrifying. But I think that, I've just decided to compartmentalize that. Okay, it's terrifying. And then we don't even have to get into all of the social justice challenges and equity and all of that. But, I kind of have to put those to the side. And then I think I'm incredibly, I guess, optimistic is the right word about all the potential.
Solutions-oriented.
Yes, solutions oriented. I think that seeing the way things are shifting, like what we were talking about earlier, with it now making financial sense to make these changes that are more sustainable, more renewable, et cetera. I recently did get my electric car because it actually became super affordable for
Right.
me to buy it. Because
Me too.
nice. And that's a combination of government subsidies. The rebate was fantastic.
Yeah.
And my company offers free charging at work. So
Boom.
to not have to pay to run my car anymore
Yeah.
is huge. That's a huge benefit. So, I think that things like that have shifted the math so that it now makes sense. So things like that are really encouraging to me. That's kind of the financial piece. And then I think that the actual solutions piece, the innovation and the engineering is really exciting. I mean, we have a steep hill to climb. We have a ton of work to do. We're behind. We've read all those articles. But I am optimistic that the pace at which we're innovating and bringing technology to fruition and being able to actually get something off the ground and scale it is exciting. And I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to figure this out and kind of engineer our way out of this problem. So I definitely am optimistic. I think that, again, as I said at the start, I think now is the most exciting time to be in sustainability because it's actually happening.
Right.
There's the critical mass. There's enough tailwind and there's enough momentum behind it that I think it's here to stay, and it is actively transitioning us to that more sustainable economy that we want to see.
Yeah. Well, one thing you say that I think is a great perspective and a thing to help remind people, right? One of my favorite phrases that people way smarter than me who studied this stuff like to say is that today's problems are the result of yesterday's solutions, right? We talk about fossil fuel so much. It's easy to forget that 100 years ago that we didn't live in the energy society. It was all, I don't know if you count gas lamps or whatever, right? But it was a fundamentally, like there was a whole industry for freezing ice
Right.
in New England and shipping it around the world, which is just insane. There was like the Ice King of Boston and all these like barons for, giant blocks of ice and all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And it is a different world because of technology and innovation. And the trajectory is messy, but on the whole, it's a better quality of life for a more amount of people.
Yes.
Right? Leaning into that. You are such a great example of this principle at work, right?
It is interesting too. And I know, I want to stay focused on the optimism, but it is interesting how
You can take us down the path of darkness.
only briefly and only in a slightly humorous way. But, the idea that today's problems were yesterday's solutions, I think it really does ring true. And I think this is a true statement that, because I've read it somewhere that, the people who started extracting oil originally were trying to save the whales.
Right.
Because the gas lamps and such that you referred to were fueled by whale blubber. And so you had these environmentalists saying, can we find an alternative fuel source?
That's crazy.
Right?
Oh my God.
And so here they are trying to, going, okay, like maybe this black oozy stuff in Texas or wherever it was might be able to be an alternative to the whale blubber so that we can leave the whales alone.
Whale-free energy.
Whale-free energy. So, yeah, it's so interesting. And at the scale that it started, it obviously was not really an issue. And
Right.
you were pretty much just having this oil that was more or less on the surface or really shallow and not this big extractive process. But it is almost humorous, I think, to think about how sometimes this great solution that does solve one problem
Right.
might have consequences down the road. And I think it is interesting to think about, like, I think, and the like electric vehicle batteries versus the lithium that needs to come out of the ground is one where those impacts and trade-offs are kind of happening in real time, so you can kind of more easily evaluate what that trade-off actually looks like. But it'll be interesting to see if there are things that we come up with today that seem really clever, and then we realize down the track, oh, whoopsies, maybe that wasn't the best thing to do or material to use or what have you. But I think that's an interesting story, that the people who started using oil were actually environmentalists.
Right. It was an environmental movement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's kind of like, it's almost like ping pong. Like you bounce off one issue, trying to solve one, and then you counter a bunch of other ones, and end up solving a bunch of stuff along the way. And like that's just how it goes. I love this whole enchilada of it's not zero sum. It's all real. It's an extraordinary time to be working in this field, as you say, right?
It is. Yes. Well, I think we both are followers and fans of what was Future Crunch and now Fix the News.
Oh my
And
God.
I just think that
I
they
didn't know that you were.
Oh yeah. I saw them. So your listeners might have to Google them, but please do Google
Yes.
them and subscribe to their newsletter. They have a free version of the newsletter, Fix the News. I first saw them as a keynote at a conference back in Wellington. So this is probably like 2017 or something. Yeah. And they were such compelling keynote speakers, Gus and Tane. And, their whole premise is that if we only hear and see bad news about how everything is falling apart and there's no hope and we're all doomed, then yes, we all want to be turtles and just retreat into our shell. Yeah. And it can be very depressing and demoralizing and all of the things. And so their whole premise is fix the news. Like there are positive stories happening everywhere, all around the world, every single day.
Right.
And they're really trying to bring those to light and publicize them. And I so respect what they do. And I feel like it's so important because when, and it's similar to the Allbirds story as well, that if you can demonstrate this positive story and be a positive example of doing things differently that's in a better way, then you can actually bring people along, and it can be really inspiring and empowering for people. Whereas, the traditional news media narrative is just so negative and so not empowering and so not solutions focused. And I think there are so many ways that people can get involved in their own ways. I mean, you doing this podcast, you're putting stories out there. I think the stories we tell ourselves are just so important. And so if you haven't already checked out Fix the News, their newsletters are full of often very small stories, often very big stories, like the gigawatts of renewable energy that China is installing, or the fact that we now have a vaccine for malaria, which is just incredible. These incredible steps for humanity to be taking. Yeah. But there are also all these little bite-sized stories of just people, again, coming back to like the individuals and human beings and people and communities taking steps to create a conservation area in the area where they live, and coming up with some really cool, clever innovation to get plastic out of the river. And there's just there are these stories everywhere. So I think the important thing for all of us is to curate our narrative a bit more intentionally, because news is important, and it's not that you should never watch the news or anything, but I think to balance that with some optimism. So this podcast and Fix the News also has a podcast, and they have this newsletter, and they have a TED Talk, and it just to keep that narrative balanced so that we feel like we can access the solutions, we can be part of the solutions, and each one of us has ideas and contributions that are valuable. Yeah. And feel empowered to actually tap into that.
Yes. Yeah, highly recommend Future Crunch, Fix the News. I think the website's still Future, but they changed the news-oriented part of it to Fix the News recently. But I have one of their T-shirts, though. Nice. When it still said Future Crunch, so it's vintage now, and I'm very happy about that. Yes. What Future Crunch taught me was that you can look anywhere, and you'll find great stuff.
Absolutely.
And I love that idea.
Yeah. And I think it's just such important work because, we have to make visible these stories because it's how we all keep going. And not just keep going. It's how we think of, when you start putting ideas together, then you get new ideas and better ideas. So it's that sustaining piece that we all need because we need optimism. And we need to keep going when things feel difficult. But then, you also need to be thinking outside the box. And I think unless you start talking to each other and engaging this human to human piece, then you can just get a little bit stuck. So thank you for doing this and bringing this perspective and this philosophy of sharing the good news stories and the optimism to New Hampshire.
Well, thanks for doing the work, Anna.
Yeah,
You're one of my favorite people. I'd love to have you on here again someday.
Absolutely.
Hopefully on my 400th episode or whatever.
I will come back.
But always a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Andy. It's always a pleasure to talk to you as well.
Hey there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Recording space was provided by Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator of Granite Goodness and the host of the Granite Goodness podcast, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.